Greetings, ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to this World of Tanks review of the T26E4 Super Pershing. This, of course, is the American Tier 8 Premium Medium Tank. This is a machine that's undergone some changes, shall we say, as the game has been going on. So, let's kick off, as ever, with a little bit of historical background. The M26 Pershing was a tank that the Americans developed and was ready to see service toward the end of the Second World War. It was originally classified as a heavy tank and was shipped out to Germany. The idea was that it would have a gun that was, so the 90mm M3 gun on it was loosely based to have similar, loosely based on and thus had similar performance to the short 88, the L56 gun that the Germans used, the gun that was found on the legendary Tiger. The Super Pershing was an attempt to up-arm that tank. So basically, they took a Pershing and gave it a longer barreled 90mm gun. So the new 90mm gun was supposed to have a performance comparable to the long 88mm gun found on the Tiger II. That was the idea. So, well, yeah, it has a dirty great big longer barreled gun poking out the front of the turret. Fine. Now, this of course caused problems. The tank was never designed to have this dirty great gun poking out the front, and having this gun completely screwed up the tank's centre of balance. And so in order to get around this, they basically welded loads of bits of metal to the tank. Because of course the problem with putting a longer barreled gun at the front of the machine is that you shift the centre of balance further and further away from the centre of the tank where the tracks actually are. And the problem that that brings in is that it makes the tank liable to tip over on a small incline or something like that. So what they did was they basically welded bits of boilerplate and random metal essentially to the front of the tank. So this is where you can see on the front of the turret, this section goes round to the side, across the front and over to this side, and on the front of the hull you've got more of this. It wasn't designed to give the tank additional protection. It was mainly designed to be a counterbalance for the additional weight of the gun. Now, they never improved the engine on this thing, and as a result the Super Pershing, as it became known, was a rather sluggish tank indeed. Now this thing did actually see service. There were a few of them, I believe, that were modified from regular Pershings. One of them made it out into Europe before the end of the war, and it seemed to acquit itself fairly well in combat. In terms of gun performance, it was estimated that the gun was capable of penetrating, at reasonable combat ranges, 200, 220, 250, depending on the range, millimeters of flat steel plate armour, which was very impressive. However, you do have to bear in mind one caveat here. The gun was firing, when it did this, ammunition that in World of Tanks terms would be considered armour-piercing composite rigid, APCR ammo, so premium ammunition. That was part of the one of the ways in which they managed to get such good penetration performance out of the gun. To give you an idea of how good the gun was, they tested it out on some captured Panthers, and at reasonable combat, reasonable engagement ranges, the 90mm shell from the Super Pershing went into one Panther, out the other side of the tank, continued and penetrated a second Panther. It really had considerable stopping power. However, again, the ammunition used would, in game terms, be considered APCR ammo. So that's where the tank fits in historically. It was, there were only a few of them made, but it did see service, it did see combat, and it was designed as a way to upgun the Pershing. So, what is it that we get in the game? Well, firstly, this is based on the Pershing. Now, the Pershing was originally conceived by the Americans as a heavy tank, but was later redesignated a medium, and in the game here it is designated as a medium tank, and thus the Super Pershing is also designated a medium tank. However, it doesn't really fit the bill for a medium. I'm going to talk more about the gun in a moment, but you get 1500 hit points, which is the same as the IS-3. So in terms of hit points, I mean, the Pershing has quite a lot of hit points for a tier 8 medium tank, similar to the Korean pattern here at 1450. But the Super Pershing at 1500 is really more on par with same tier heavy tanks rather than medium tanks. We'll talk more about the hull armour and the turret armour in a moment as well. These numbers shouldn't really be put too much stock in. Technically that is the thickness of the hull armour and the turret armour, but you have to bear in mind that on top of that you've got a load of spaced armour being slapped on. So in practice the effective frontal armour of the Super Pershing is far better than the 101mm would lead you to believe in the garage, although the side and rear are about what it says they are. Mobility, well, this is where the story starts getting a little bit suboptimal. Like I said, they never upgraded the engine on the Super Pershing, and with all of this additional weight and the bigger gun breech, it really weighed the tank down. So what you've got is a tank that weighs over 50 tons with a 500 horsepower engine, so a specific power of 9.8 horsepower per ton. This puts it very much more in the realms of heavy tank levels of mobility. The traverse speed isn't bad, and the top speed of over 40 kilometers an hour is actually not bad at all, but you're really only going to reach those speeds going downhill. So mobility wise, the Super Pershing feels more like a heavy tank. Concealment, well, who really cares about concealment? This is not the stealthiest machine in the world. In terms of spotting, well, your view range is here I've got 398 meters, and that's probably including some of my crew skills, but the view range is certainly not bad on the tank. Signal range of 795, again that'll be including some boosts from the radio, but a very good radio signal range. Now let's talk about that gun. There is, of course, I mean, there's no point talking about research path because this is a premium tank. You just get a specific set of modules, and we're talking about this gun here, the 90mm gun T26E4. Now, although it says that this gun is only found on the Super Pershing, in practice this gun is also found on the T32. It's the stock gun on the T32. And you might be forgiven, if you compare this with the gun found on the regular Pershing, you might be forgiven for thinking that this shouldn't be, the historical description is wrong. This isn't an upgrade over the gun on the Pershing. But the thing you have to bear in mind, in its top configuration, the Pershing in this game is not historical. It never used the longer 90mm gun that it's been given. It only used the shorter barreled 90mm gun. So, what do we get? 7.32 rate of fire is not too bad. 170 penetration, oh dear. 170 penetration is pretty poor. In fact, if you compare it to other tier 8 medium tanks, those tanks with penetrations down toward this value at tier 8 tend to either A, have been buffed, or B, be considered fairly poor, even though they have better mobility, and so they can get round to people's sides and rear in a way that the Super Pershing can't. So this penetration is bad. However, there is a way of solving that. 258mm of penetration with APCR, holy cow. And because, as I mentioned, the mobility of this tank is actually quite poor, what you find is that in most engagements your choices are A, using 170 pen, or B, if the target's relatively well armoured, switching to your APCR ammo. And this has serious impacts on your profitability, but more on that in a moment later. Penetration on the HE rounds, nothing spectacular. It's 90mm HE, don't expect too much, 45. Alpha damage, standard for a 90mm gun, 240, 240, 320 with high explosive. Accuracy, 0.38, dispersion at 100 meters is not particularly good. The aiming time of 2.3 seconds is alright. But, I'm not going to go into it in detail, but the aiming stats, the bloom values on this gun are pretty darn terrible. And so in practice, it takes the gun a little while to aim. So all things considered, this gun is actually not very good. It's at best very mediocre, and at worst positively dire, especially when you couple that with the poor mobility on the tank. So you have this strange situation in which the historical Super Pershing was developed in order to get a sweet gun, But the in-game Super Pershing, assuming you don't want to fire APCR, actually has a pretty naff gun. If you don't mind firing a bit of APCR, then the gun, well, it's still not great, but it's okay. It's not as if the DPM on the gun is even that good. It's okay, but nothing better. Average damage per minute, 2,081. If you compare that with the Korean pattern, it's about the same. And if you compare this with a lot of Tier 8 medium tanks, it's there or thereabouts. It's nothing to really get excited about. Crew skills and equipment, well, just before we get onto that, let's get out of the way. This thing is heavily armoured from the front, has a kind of lackluster gun, not good mobility. You end up playing this thing basically as a pocket heavy tank, and hoping that you can shoot lightly armoured targets. So, your crew skills, well, honestly, you'll be using whatever American medium crew you have lying around that you want to train up. But if you really want a crew specifically for the Super Pershing, Sixth Sense is always a good plan for your commander. Repairs are always good bets. Safe storage is not a bad idea. Shots to the side of the tank can set the ammo rack off, or can damage the ammo rack, which sucks. Brothers in Arms is not bad. There's no point with camo. View range enhancing equipment, also not a bad bet. Sorry, crew skills, not equipment. Speaking of equipment, this is not going to come as any great surprise. I recommend one of two different equipment setups, and I will probably keep recommending this until Wargaming finally fixes equipment in this game. 1. Vertical stabilizer. If you can mount a vert stab, do mount a vert stab. It's really, really very good. 2. Medium caliber tank gun rammer. 10% better DPM is 10% better DPM. If you can't mount one of these things, generally speaking, you want to. 3rd equipment slot, I leave it up to you. Coated optics is not a bad idea. Improved vents gives your vehicle an all-round buff. I've gone for improved vents on the basis that I play my Super Pershing as a heavy tank, and so it tends to be involved in closer range engagements. But you might prefer coated optics, in which case that's fine. Consumables, I've just got your standard set of consumables. Ammunition, haha. You'll notice I have more APCR ammo on this tank than I tend to carry. Usually I whack 5 rounds in pretty much every tank, just as something to fall back on. In the Super Pershing, I actually use those rounds sometimes, so I've got 14 APCR rounds, which is quite a lot. And when you consider they cost, 20 times as much as your armor piercing or your HE rounds, yeah, they can be a bit pricey to use, but they are invaluable to use, to have. So there we go. Little bit annoying maybe, but it is what it is. There's no point talking about kind of upgrade path or anything. As I mentioned, it's a premium tank. You get what you get. So without too much further ado, let's go and have a look at the armor profile, module locations, gameplay, all of that good stuff. Right, let's look at the armor profile on this. I'm not going to dwell on the rear and sides too much because it's pretty terrible. 50, 76, big whoop. High caliber HE may even be able to penetrate your sides and rear. In fact, I've been penetrated in there by a T49 before. Sides of the turret, most of it is a relatively easy penetration, apart from these sections that have that frontal shield going over them. So let's go to the front of the Super Pershing where the armor actually is. If we're just talking about the front of the hull, well, this is one of those tanks where the lower front plate is not necessarily weaker than the upper front plate. They're about the same. They both give you around about 220mm of effective armor without angling, and you can't angle them too much because then your side becomes weak if you're not careful. And so even with optimal angling, you're not going to get the frontal plates above about 230mm of effective armor. So tanks with around 250 pen and upwards will go through the front of your hull without too many difficulties. There is of course this one weak spot, this machine gun just here, which is 76, which can be a problem. And if we're talking about the turret front, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Where you have this gun shield in place, the armor is very strong indeed. I mean, here you've got gun shield plus gun mantlet plus turret, and you're looking at, well, 800 in places, 350. It's just, to all intents and purposes, it's impenetrable. However, away from these areas, you've got these cheeks that can often be penetrated with around about, 175, 180 pen here and here. And at the top, interestingly, although the tank looks like it has 2 cupolas, only one of them is actually modelled. This is the one with those sort of pipe things over it. So you can shoot the tank in those pipes and the shot will hit this cupola which is only about 100mm of effective armour. With a bit of gun depression, the turret armour becomes better. These sort of cheek sections are still a problem, but you hide much of the upper part of the turret weak spots. You know, things like this commander's cupola, for example. So there we have it. Super Pershing, the armour is on the front. The front of the hull is good up to about 220, 230mm of penetration. Front of the turret will either, you know, bounce lots, or if the person knows where to shoot you and can hit them, they can just go through you like a hot knife through butter. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. But generally speaking, the frontal armour on the Super Pershing is pretty good, and when you combine that with the fact that this is all spaced armour, making the front of the tank essentially very resilient to high explosive and almost completely immune to high explosive anti-tank ammunition, it means this tank can actually be very frustrating to face off against. So let's have a look at the module locations for the Super Pershing. Really from the front, there's only really a couple of things to worry about. You've got the driver over here, where there's that blue section, and over here on the kind of left hand side of the hull as we look at it, you've got the radio operator. But apart from that, there isn't really that much to worry about. I mentioned the little machine gun weak point in the when we were looking at the armour. From the side in the turret, you've got the loader here sitting in the left hand side of the turret, and in the side profile, and this is of course in common with a lot of American tanks, you've got this big fat engine fuel tank booty that will set on fire as soon as you look at it. And also worth noting, in sort of the middle under the turret of the Super Pershing, in the side, you actually have the ammo rack, this white box here. From the rear, nothing particularly surprising. Again, you've got engine to concern yourself with. I mean, the big fat engine deck kind of gives that away. And the right-hand side is very much the same as the left-hand side of the tank, except instead of the loader, you now have the gunner toward the front of the turret, and the commander, of course, sitting beneath this commander's hatch. And again, you've got this big flammable booty and an ammo rack in about the middle of the tank. Now, I can tell you from experience that getting shot in the side in this machine is very painful. The most painful one I remember was having a T29, the Tier 8 American light tank with that big fat howitzer, come around the side, put a HE round through my side armour, wreck my tank, take out loads of my crew, and set me on fire. It made me very, very sad indeed. But that's just what you have to deal with. Super Pershing is very resilient from the front and very much not from the sides or the rear. Okay, here we go, a couple of bits of gameplay for you from the Super Pershing. However, in these games, instead of doing what I usually do, where you see one game where the tank is top tier, one game where it's bottom tier, because firstly, the Super Pershing is a premium tank, and also because it gets limited matchmaking anyway, I'm actually going to show one game where the Super Pershing makes a respectable amount of credits and one game where it hemorrhages money. Because it's a Tier 8 premium, and so one of the key things people tend to be thinking about when they look to buy one of these machines is, well, how profitable is it? So, this is an assault game here on Corellia. We're on the attacking team, and I've already commented in chat that there's a lot of heavy tanks on the enemy team, which means there's a lot of health to chew through. And when you're playing an assault game, that can be rather problematic, as the emphasis really is on you as the attacker, if you are the attacker, to get off your backside and go and kill the enemies. You've only got 10 minutes, rather than the standard 15, in order to win the game. Now, we are top tier here, which is fairly nice, and hopefully we're going to be able to prod a little bit of buttock. So trundling up this hill here, ideally I usually prefer to fight on the other side of the map, but I spawned at the number 1 spawn, and the Super Pershing is nowhere near mobile enough to really be repositioning a lot. So I just went with the closest flank, and I'm going to attack down it. Like I said, we've got limited time, we've already used a minute and a half, and so far all I've been doing is trundling into position. There's a T150, he's not a massive threat to me, but I do take a shot in the side from the enemy IS-2 that takes out my commander as I was spotted. Remember, Super Pershing armour is pretty good, but only to the front. To the sides and the rear, it's fairly woeful. put that shot through the T150's lower plate, bounce his return fire. As mentioned in the garage, the weak spots on the Super Pershing are fairly large. However, they're quite difficult to hit from range, and if your gun is kind of derpy, as the T150's gun is. So we managed to put another shot into the T150, and one more should finish this guy off. Now for a tier 8, well, I'm going to call it a tier 8 heavy tank, because in terms of function and mobility, that's really what the Super Pershing is like. Ooh, we took a big hit there. So for a tier 8 heavy tank, the 170 pen, as I mentioned, is not very much, but it is enough to deal with the T150. This, however, is where the 170 pen really falls apart. We're fighting a KV4 and even a T34 at long range, and against these sorts of targets, the 170 pen of the armor-piercing rounds is not sufficient, and to just drive over there straight into both of those tanks would be stupid. The KV4 isn't as much the problem as the T34 with its 250 odd penetration. So, I've switched to my APCR rounds, which bumps the penetration up to almost 260. And that means I'm able to penetrate these guys from range. However, it also means that I'm expending rather a large number of credits in order to do so. But while those two tanks are shooting me, they're not shooting my potentially squishier allies. Although that shot actually bounces on the KV4, so even with APCR, you know, it doesn't mean your penetrations are guaranteed. Although the 260 odd pen that you do get with APCR is a bit silly. KV4 backs off, he doesn't like that engagement, can't say I really blame him, to be honest. And I switch back to armor piercing, bounce another shot, and you can see we're taking a right well battering here from these tanks. T34 is the tank that really concerns me. If he knows what he's doing, he can put shots through my hull without too much difficulty. And actually, although the T34 is renowned for having a weak hull, his angled hull at this sort of range is actually perfectly capable of bouncing my 170 pen with the regular armor-piercing shot. So, probably going to have to switch back to our APCR if I want to hurt this guy at this range. My other option, of course, is driving straight over to him, and slowly pondering over to a T34 out in the open is not what I consider a particularly good life plan. There we go, a penetration. That was with my APCR. Going for another one. Yep. And the T34, I'm surprised he hasn't backed off sooner, but there we go. Finally deciding to be somewhere else. Preloading an armor-piercing round for my next shot. Now I think I have the opportunity to close the distance, so giving it a go. Of course, I am down to less than a third health here. You know, although the frontal armor is good, it only takes a couple of penetrating hits from these sort of 120-ish millimeter guns, and suddenly you're not looking quite so clever. VK takes out my tracks, preloading an APCR round again because, once more, KV4 from a distance, who is now firing high explosive at me in an effort to do some damage. I bounce on him again. I was going for the lower front plate there, but no dice. Someone leaves the KV4 on low health, and I bounce on him again. 5 rounds of APCR remaining, and my 90mm high explosive rounds isn't really reliable. Can't really reliably do a great deal of damage to him. T34, maybe I'll have more luck against him. Yes, the hull is angled, but hopefully we'll be able to do a bit of damage. And we've only got 4 minutes of this match left. Still bounces, although that was a regular armor-piercing round, and I'm now just staring these guns down, taking a ferocious pounding in the process. HE round from the KV4 takes out my gun, managed to put the gun, repair the gun. That's both my med pack and my repair kit used now. And we're at less than 4 minutes. Our team really needs to actually advance. And this T34 is not helping. He is showing his side armor to the guy who's likely to shoot him. Never mind. Right. Pushing up, KV4, a bit more HE, finally managed to kill him with an armor-piercing round straight through the side armor. So, closing the distance on the enemies. That T34 has died, so I don't have to worry about him anymore. Down to less than 300 health. But the enemy team really has struggled to kill me. And so this game, you also get to see what the armour on the Super Pershing is capable of when most of the time you are at range. Of course, the flip side is that at that sort of engagement range, your armour is good, but your gun is also pretty naff. So it's a bit of a trade-off. IS-2 now, closing on this fellow. If he's going to poke himself out, I will take the shot. There we go. Is he going to stay there? Nah, he's not going to give me another one. He doesn't like those odds. Can't say I really blame him. And I don't know where his allies are, but they should be defending their own base. That is, of course, their objective in this game. Finally made it over 2,000 damage. But we have used most of our APCR in the process, so this is not going to be a particularly profitable game. And given the time left on this game, I'm just going to hunker down behind this rock, methinks. Because it takes 1 minute 30 for one person to capture the enemy base in this game mode, and we're never going to drive all the way over there and kill them all. If the enemy team wants to come to us to try and kill us, well, that's fine by me, but it looks like this is probably actually going to be a win by base capture, which I'm perfectly happy to live with. There we go, base captured by allies, and that is the game. So, as I mentioned, this is firstly the game that really shows off the armour on this tank, but also that highlights the downsides of this gun and how sometimes you're going to have games that are not very profitable at all. So, let's go and have a look at those post-battle results. There we go, that game ended up being enough for First Class Mastery, Shell-Proof, Fire for Effect, and the Steel Wall Medal. In the end, we actually connected some of our blind shots, so that was 2,544 damage done, 2 kills, 1,115 base experience. Friendly WZ-111 also had a good game, seemed to be a good game to be driving. Premium tank. Now, this is the crunch. So, a couple of important numbers over here. Firstly, 25 shots fired, 20 hits, 12 penetrations. Most of those shots were at long range. Even with APCR, they're not very impressive stats. However, we received 28 hits, of which 7 penetrated and 21 did not, meaning that we blocked 5,230 damage with our armour. Got a bit of assistance damage into the bargain as well. So, damage blocked by armour, quite impressive. Now let's look at the profitability. Bearing in mind I was running a standard account at the time, that game generated 63,500 gross credits, but I had ammunition resupply costs of 56,000 credits, and so all told I actually made a very small loss on that game. If I'd have been running a premium account, that still would have been a win to the tune of 31,500 credits, but this is my point. If you're going to be taking those kind of shots, long-range shots against heavily armoured targets, and sometimes you're going to have to, because the other option is slowly and ponderously driving toward the enemy tanks, and in the case of something like a T34 that has a gun perfectly capable of going through your frontal armour, that's not a very good option. So, yeah. It was, you know, it's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't situations. You load the APCR because your gun is not very good. Certainly not on that platform, but that means that the game is not very profitable, and this is supposed to be a tier 8 premium tank. Part of the point is that you make money. So there was that game. Let's switch to a game now that was a little bit more profitable. Here we go then with our second game. As it turns out, although as I mentioned this was not my intention, as it turns out I am actually showing you one game where the tank's top tier and one where it's bottom tier. Previous game, of course, was a tier 8 match. This is a tier 9 match, and the Super Pershing gets limited matchmaking, so this is the worst sort of matchmaking you will see. However, as I've already mentioned, the previous game was the one where we spent a lot of credits on ammunition. This game is one where that's not going to be the case. I'm not really sure at the beginning why I was sat there. No idea. Maybe it was someone on the phone or the door went or something. Not really sure. Anyway. Again, it's actually on Corellia, and again, it's an assault game. This time, however, we're on the defending team rather than the attacking team, and immediately there's an enemy T69, not that we can actually do anything about him. So, I like to fight over in the sort of A0 corner if I possibly can, and thus that is where I'm on my way to. If we look at the tanks available on the enemy team, most of them I can penetrate with my armor-piercing rounds. The only ones I'm really going to struggle against are, let's see, KV4, IS-3, possibly the T30 and that T10. All the others I should be able to penetrate without too much difficulty with my armor-piercing rounds. You know, the more heavily armoured of those remaining tanks such as the Tiger P, have fairly substantial weak spots for me to aim for, so not too bad. Trundling up here as well, we have our friendly T10. Most of the rest of our team has decided to hang back, which, well, it could go well, it could go badly. We'll see how it actually pans out. Trundling up here, as I mentioned in the garage, the engine power, the engine horsepower to ton ratio on the Super Pershing is not especially good. So, much like the previous game, getting into position often takes a little while. T10 here appears to be giving the enemy IS-3 a relatively easy shot into his side, which seems a little bit dumb to me, but what do I know? In the effort to try and put damage on a Comet of all tanks, so I don't think that was really worth it. Tiger P's already died on the enemy team, our E50 nailed him. And the Comet even manages to put some damage into our friendly T10, who is really not making the best use of his tank, if I'm going to be honest. Yeah. Remembering we only have to hold, we don't have to be too aggressive or anything like that. And we do have a bunch of tanks in the background, so if the enemy do push on us, we can use their firepower to dissuade the enemy from continuing to do so. There's the enemy KV3. He's stock actually, which I wasn't expecting, but is some welcome news. Unfortunately, I'm not able to get a shot on him. A little bit sad, but there we go. Someone tries to shoot me, but we just bounce it, so that is fine. Swing the tank around, and let's see if we're going to have to face off against this IS-3 and KV4, I believe it was. There's also, of course, a T30 around here somewhere as well. There is the IS-3 in question. He bounces on me, I bounce on him. I'm actually quite surprised that my allies, providing supporting fire, only managed to get one shell into him. Looked like it was from the Lerva. I thought they might have managed to make a bit more of that, but, you know, there we go. Them's the breaks. IS-3 armor for you. And profile and everything, really. So, tree just fell behind me, and so I know there is an enemy tank who appears to be trying his luck to come up my rear. And we're going to be ready for this guy. There's the T30. I actually managed to bounce his shot, which I was not expecting, not that I'm complaining. Going for the lower front plate. There we go. Take a shot from him. It looks like the T30 is actually using the smaller gun. The gun from the T34 doesn't look like he's unlocked the big gun yet. I'm quite surprised he penetrated that shot. I mean, I know I'm potentially giving a little bit of my side armor, but I thought I was doing this in such a way that I wasn't leaving myself especially exposed. Just going to pause it for a second, see where he penetrated us. No, those shots were straight through the frontal armor, the heavily angled frontal plate. Frontal plate on this tank, maybe, I guess I'm angled down a little bit. The frontal plate on this tank doesn't really stand up to guns with 250 pen. And that 120mm gun that he was using does indeed have about 250 pen. So that T30 has cost me most of my health. Now he's died for it, but still most of my health. I get a little bit lucky there in bouncing the IS-3. Managed to put a shot into and track the fellow, and I'm just going to keep this guy tracked there if I possibly can. Hopefully my allies, there we go, can put some shots into him. He tracks me. Go for a shot on the side of the pike nose, but wonderfully modelled terrain stops that from connecting. And we're still alive. KV4 is over there. He's stocked, but could still be a problem. There's a Challenger around somewhere as well. T69. Need to be careful of because I do not want to give that auto-loading gun shots into my rear. He'll shred me. So, lining up a shot on the guy, and we actually bounce. The T69 is one of those tanks with a really weird armor profile. On paper it doesn't look that impressive, but then you remember that random bits of it do actually have protection. It's bizarre. Leopard prototype, and that could have been really bad. As it is, we're not dead. One or two more shots will be needed to finish this guy off. He can certainly do the damage on me, and yet I'm still alive. Now, definitely looks like the Top Gun, and the Top Gun on that tank has, close as damn it, 270 penetration, so I am surprised to be bouncing those. Not that I'm complaining. Put a shot into the T69, bounce some return fire. Thankfully that Challenger isn't coming at me from behind, so I'm not dead yet. WZ-132 is over to our right, going for our artillery. Leopard prototype and the AMX CDC have both gone down. There goes the M12 that we just lost our artillery into the bargain, and we are winning this by 1 kill. I'd really like to go up there and do something about the Challenger, but I don't want that T69 just to have free reign to pour shots into my soft, squishy, flabby bum. There's the Challenger. He's actually moved, so my rear should be secure. And we're going to see if we can put a shot into this guy as he pokes out. There we go. And that leaves him a 1-shot. And can we finish the fellow off? Nope. He manages to get out of the way in time, unfortunately. Come on, just a bit more. There we go. And there's our first kill of the match, which is perhaps a little surprising. But he's dead. That just leaves the WZ and the T69. There is the T69 in question. He's taken a bit of a pounding. Just going to speed this along a little bit. I don't think I'm going to make it to that T69 before the E50 wrecks his face. I could be wrong, of course. He does actually do some damage to the E50, but the E50 nails him in the end. And now it's just a case of hunting down that light tank. Wherever the guy's gotten to. Where is he? Nope, not over there. And actually, I'm not convinced that we're going to be able to chase this guy down before the game ends. 15 seconds of the match left. And no, it looks like the WZ-132 has managed to make his escape. But all the same, it's a win that we managed to secure there, so I am not complaining. Now, in this match, although the matchmaking was worse, we didn't actually fire a single round of APCR, so let's go and look at the profitability of this game. Another game that was enough for first-class mastery, fire for effect, shell-proof, spotter, and again, another steel wall. The Super Pershing is pretty good at racking up those steel wall medals. 2,644 damage done, 1 kill, 1,192 base experience, puts us at the top of our team by XP. E50 on our team got the highest damage in the game. No congratulations should go to the enemy T69, almost 3k damage, and in an inferior tank. 16 shots fired, 13 hits, 11 pens for that damage count, most of which was from relatively close range. Received 11 hits, 3 penned, 8 didn't, for just under 2,500 damage blocked by our armour, and in this case we also got over 1,800 assistance damage. Combine that with the fact that we didn't fire any APCR rounds, and even with a standard account we made a 59,000 credit profit. With a premium account that would have been a 94,500 credit profit. And a reasonable amount of experience as well. So those two games give you kind of two, not complete extremes, but two different credit making experiences in the Super Pershing. Obviously, generally your games are going to be somewhere in the middle, rather than going to one of those extremes or the other. So let's quickly nip back to the garage. So the Super Pershing, all things considered, what have you got? Well, you have this strange tank. You have a tank that uses a medium tank crew, but it doesn't play like a traditional medium tank. It's a tier 8 premium, but it's one of the cheaper tier 8 premiums. If you actually look at the price of it, it is 7,200 or something. 7,200 gold, which is about in line with the newer generation of tier 8 premiums. Let's compare it with, I don't know, here's the M4A1 Ravioli, 7,200, AMX CDC, 7,450. the FV4202, 73. Panther 88 is about the same, 7,300. So it's one of the cheaper tier 8 premium tanks, but it's still a tier 8 premium. And one of the reasons you'd get a tier 8 premium is for the money-making factor. How profitable is this machine? Well, as you saw from the games, the answer is really variable. Sometimes you make a really nice amount of money, but if you have to dip into those APCR rounds, that really eats into your credit-making margin. Now, I should point out at this stage, I didn't buy the Super Pershing. I got it from a mission. So, bear that in mind. Do I like the Super Pershing? Really depends on the game. Sometimes it's fun to play, sometimes it can be really frustrating, as there are times when your armor feels only as good as your weak spots, which suck. Those games will happen. In terms of profitability, it's not great. There are other tier 8 premiums that are far more profitable. In terms of how difficult the tank is to play, it's pretty easy to play. There really isn't that much finesse to it. You can't angle your armor too much, otherwise you over-angle your sides and you get penetrated. You can't really flank people much, you're too slow, so if you can't penetrate a target, yeah, weak spot knowledge helps, but if that's not going to work, you just switch to APCR. It really is quite a simple machine to play. Do I recommend spending the money on it? I mean, 7,200 gold, yeah, sure, it's cheap for a tier 8 premium, but it's still, well, not cheap. I mean, how much is 7,200 gold? If you were just to buy the gold, and then use that, how much would it set you back? Well, 7,500 gold sets you back about 23 quid. So this thing's over £20. Is it worth that? This is the thing. If you want a tank to train your American medium tank crews, there are probably better bets, because this thing doesn't play like another American medium tank. You know, occasionally there are things like the Fury available, or the Korean pattern, or things like that. And if you want a tank to make you money, a tier 8 premium, it's not the best out there. For about the same price, you could go and pick up a Panther 88, which will probably make you a lot more cash. The one thing that is worth saying about the Super Pershing, though, which may sway you one way or the other, it does get limited matchmaking, as I've already mentioned. So no tier 10 games. That makes up a little bit for the kind of cruddy gun. Does it make up for it enough? That's something only really you can answer for yourselves. The Super Pershing is not a tank I particularly recommend, but there are people that have fun in it, and I enjoy playing mine. Put it this way, I enjoy mine, but I wouldn't have paid money for it. As I say, I got mine from a mission, so I didn't pay for it, and given the choice, I wouldn't. So I guess that's really the overriding thing I can say about the Super Pershing. It's alright, but I wouldn't personally put the money down for it. I think there'd be better choices. Anyway, there we go. I hope you guys enjoyed that review of the Super Pershing, possibly even found it vaguely informative. If you did, by all means feel free to catch some of my other videos, and or subscribe to my channel, and I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao, ciao.